The galaxy feared her because she never needed mercy to win. The sky above Rivos Prime burned the color of dying embers as thousands of starships drifted silently through the upper atmosphere, like metal gods watching a funeral from orbit. Cold rain hissed against shattered stone. Emergency sirens echoed somewhere beneath the ruins of the capital city, distant and weak now, like a heartbeat finally giving up. General Valera Thorne stood alone at the edge of the command platform, overlooking the conquered world. Her dark armor reflected the crimson glow of collapsing defense towers below, smooth and polished, despite the ash falling around her boots. The long black cape hanging from her shoulders barely moved in the wind. Nothing about her moved unless she wanted it to. Around her, Kairith officers waited in complete silence. Nobody spoke without permission. Nobody even breathed too loudly near the Widow of Stars. Valera's violet eyes scanned the city beneath the rain. Fires burned across miles of broken streets. Transport lanes sat empty. Massive holographic banners flickered between power failures, each one displaying the same image, now replacing the old planetary flag. The silver crest of the Kairith Dominion. Another world conquered, another species folded into the Empire. Another victory added to the long list that made mothers across the galaxy whisper her name to frightened children at night. 43 campaigns, 0 defeats. Entire civilizations had surrendered the moment her fleet entered orbit. But tonight, standing above the final world foolish enough to resist, Valera felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, only silence. A cold, hollow silence that had been growing inside her for years. "The Planetary Council has officially surrendered, General," Commander Severin said carefully from behind her. "Civilian resistance has ended." Valera didn't answer immediately. Rainwater slid slowly down the sharp angles of her blue-purple skin. Her silver-white hair clung to the collar of her armor. Somewhere below, emergency generators flickered one final time before the district went dark. "How many casualties?" she asked at last. Severin hesitated. "Minimal compared to previous engagements." That was not an answer. Valera turned her head slightly, and the commander immediately lowered his eyes toward the floor. 12,000 military personnel, he corrected quietly. Civilian numbers are still processing. The rain intensified. Tiny drops tapped against metal railings and shattered glass. Valera looked back toward the ruined skyline. 12,000. Years ago, those numbers used to matter. Years ago, she had memorized every life lost under her command. Years ago, before the Empire transformed her into something colder than war itself. "Begin occupation protocols," she said. "Food distribution within 6 hours. Medical corridors opened immediately." Severin blinked in surprise. "General, these people resisted us." "And now they are ours," Valera replied. "Starving them would be inefficient." The officers exchanged uneasy glances behind her. Mercy was not a word associated with the Widow of Stars. Fear was cleaner, faster, predictable. Valera turned away from the burning city and walked through the command deck with slow, mechanical precision. Boots striking steel, cape dragging softly across polished floors. The massive doors sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss, shutting out the storm. Inside the flagship, everything felt sterile. White lights, cold air, silent crew members stepping aside the second she appeared. Nobody looked directly at her for long. Some out of respect, most out of fear.
She passed a large observation window overlooking orbit. Hundreds of conquered vessels floated beneath the fleet like chained animals. Somewhere among them were the last surviving leaders of Rivos Prime, awaiting formal surrender procedures.
Valera should have been preparing her victory speech. Instead, she stopped at the glass and stared at her own reflection. Tall, untouchable, eyes empty as deep space. There had been a time when she believed conquest would bring order to the galaxy, end corruption, end endless wars between weaker systems. She had once called herself a protector. Now, entire planets went silent when her ships appeared in the sky. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. "General," the ship's intelligence announced calmly, "a human prisoner has requested an audience." Valera's expression hardened slightly. "A prisoner?" "Yes, General. Terran survivor recovered during orbital sweep operations. Human." The word lingered strangely in her mind. Humanity had entered galactic politics less than a century ago, yet somehow they refused to behave properly. Too emotional, too stubborn, too willing to sacrifice themselves for impossible causes. Every empire considered them unpredictable, dangerous in ways statistics couldn't explain. Valera turned from the window. "Why would a prisoner request an audience with me?" "He claims," the intelligence replied after a brief pause, "that he knows why you can no longer sleep." For the first time in years, General Valera Thorne stopped walking. The detention chamber smelled faintly of antiseptic and overheated circuitry. Clean, controlled, artificial. General Valera Thorne stepped through the reinforced doors without slowing her pace, her dark armor whispering softly against the polished floor as security fields flickered to life behind her. Two Kerith guards immediately straightened at attention. Neither dared speak. Neither dared ask why the most feared military commander in the galaxy had personally come to see a single human prisoner at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning station time. Valera ignored them both. Her violet eyes settled on the man sitting alone behind the transparent containment barrier. Human males were physically unimpressive by Kerith standards. Smaller frames, less efficient musculature, fragile skeletal structure, evolutionary compromises everywhere. Yet somehow this one sat with the calm stillness of someone entirely untouched by fear. Ethan Cole leaned back in the metal chair with his arms resting loosely at his sides, ankle crossed over knee like he was waiting for a delayed train instead of standing inside the flagship of the empire that had just conquered an entire world. The overhead lights painted soft shadows across his face. Mid-30s, maybe, brown hair slightly too long around the edges, pale skin marked by exhaustion more than age. A gray civilian jacket hung loosely over a dark shirt stained with dust and engine grease. Not military. Not anymore. What unsettled Valera most was his expression. Human prisoners usually displayed one of 3 things around her: terror, hatred, or desperate obedience. Ethan Cole looked mildly disappointed. "General," one guard said carefully, "the prisoner has refused sedation twice." Ethan glanced toward the guard. "Because your sedation tastes like melted batteries." Valera studied him silently. The human returned the stare without hesitation, not challenging, not submissive, just direct. It felt strange. "Leave us," Valera ordered. Both guards froze. "General, protocol states, leave." The guards obeyed immediately. The heavy doors sealed shut behind them with a deep metallic thud, leaving only the low hum of environmental systems filling the chamber. Ethan looked around the empty room and gave a small nod. "Well," he murmured,
That either means you are very confident or very tired. Valera stepped closer to the barrier. You requested this audience. I did. You claim to know why I cannot sleep. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying her face beneath the cold white lighting. You look worse in person, he said calmly. Valera's eyes narrowed. Most beings lost the ability to breathe properly under that stare.
Ethan merely sighed and rubbed a hand across the back of his neck.
See, that right there, he said quietly.
Everyone reacts to you like you are a storm about to break through the ceiling. Perhaps they are intelligent enough to fear consequences.
No,
Ethan replied. They are terrified you stopped being a person a long time ago. Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere beyond the walls of the detention wing, engines vibrated through the structure like distant thunder. Valera crossed her arms slowly. You speak recklessly for a prisoner. You conquered my planet 12 hours ago, Ethan said. I think we are past the point where reckless matters. There was no anger in his voice. That disturbed her more than shouting would have. What were you before the invasion? She asked. Mechanic. Search and rescue pilot sometimes. Not military. Used to be. Ethan shrugged lightly. Turns out I was better at saving people than shooting at them. Valera watched him carefully. Every movement, every breath. Humans fascinated military analysts because they constantly behaved against strategic logic. They protected strangers, shared supplies during shortages, risked their lives for individuals with no tactical value. Irrational creatures, driven by emotion instead of efficiency. And yet, humanity kept surviving wars they statistically should have lost. You are not afraid of me, Valera observed. Ethan thought about that for a second. No, he admitted softly. I think that might be the problem. For the first time in years, Valera felt something dangerously close to curiosity. Explain. Ethan leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. Fear is easy, he said. You built an empire on easy things. Bigger fleets, stronger weapons, louder threats. His eyes lifted to hers. Calm, steady, human. But nobody ever taught you how to live after winning. The air suddenly felt colder inside the chamber. Valera could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her without calculation hidden underneath every word. No flattery, no political caution, no trembling obedience. Just truth delivered quietly enough to sound almost gentle. Ethan studied her expression for a long moment before speaking again. When was the last time someone looked at you? He asked softly, without being afraid. Valera opened her mouth to answer. Nothing came out. The command chamber of the Dominion flagship was built to intimidate. 40-foot ceilings disappeared into shadows above polished black steel. Massive holographic star maps rotated slowly in the center of the room, glowing blue against the cold darkness, while rows of Kaurith officers stood in absolute silence around the elevated platform. Nobody shifted their feet. Nobody whispered. The atmosphere itself felt disciplined, controlled, sharp enough to cut. General Valera Thorne stood at the center like the blade holding it all together. Her armor had been fully restored since leaving the detention wing, every silver insignia polished beneath the overhead lights. The emotional crack Ethan Cole had opened inside her hours earlier had already been buried beneath military precision. Or, at least, she wanted to believe it had. Outer colonies continue transmission blackouts, Commander Sevron reported carefully. Several sectors are refusing occupation protocols until local civilian systems are stabilized. Valera stared at the rotating star map without blinking. Deploy engineering crews first. A few officers exchanged confused glances. General, Sevron said cautiously, military enforcement would be faster. Fear is always faster, Valera replied flatly. It is also temporary. Silence followed. Nobody challenged her directly, but she felt it immediately. The hesitation, the uncertainty. Kairith commanders understood domination. They understood pressure, control, strategic force projection. Compassion, however, made them uncomfortable. It created variables, weakness, questions. Valera ignored all of it. Begin civilian supply reconstruction immediately, she continued. Water purification systems restored within 24 hours. Medical access corridors remain unrestricted. For conquered populations? Another officer asked before catching himself too late. The room became dangerously still. Valera slowly turned her head toward him. The young commander immediately lowered his eyes toward the floor. Do not mistake conquest for ownership, she said calmly. A starving world is not loyal. It is desperate. Nobody spoke after that. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes. Tactical updates, occupation logistics, political fallout from neighboring systems terrified they might be next. Valera answered every question with machine-like efficiency, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the detention chamber below deck, to the human who looked at her without fear, to the unbearable silence after his final question. When was the last time someone looked at you without being afraid? She had not answered because she genuinely could not remember. The meeting finally ended. Officers saluted and dispersed through the command deck with hurried discipline, leaving only Commander Sevron standing near the central console. The older Kairith male waited until the chamber doors sealed shut before speaking. You are distracted, he said quietly. Valera did not react. I am efficient. You visited the human prisoner personally. And? Sevron hesitated carefully. Humans are manipulative creatures. Emotional instability is one of their defining characteristics. Valera stepped toward the observation glass overlooking space. Countless warships floated beyond the transparent alloy, like silent predators sleeping in darkness. Do you know what humanity's most dangerous trait is? She asked. Sevron frowned slightly. Their aggression? No. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Cold eyes, perfect posture, armor that looked more like a prison than protection now. It is their ability to care after loss. Sevron looked genuinely confused. General? Valera folded her hands behind her back. Every species we conquered became smaller after defeat, more obedient, more afraid. Her voice lowered slightly. Humans continue helping each other even after they lose. She remembered seeing footage during the invasion. Human rescue workers carrying strangers through collapsing streets instead of fleeing. Civilians sharing oxygen masks during station failures. Medics refusing evacuation until the wounded were stable. Irrational behavior. Inefficient behavior. Yet strangely powerful. Sevron shifted uneasily. Compassion does not win wars. No, Valera said softly. But it survives them. Before Sevron could answer, an alarm pulsed through the chamber. Sharp, immediate. Red warning symbols flashed across the tactical displays. General,
the ship intelligence announced. Disturbance reported in lower medical sectors. Civilian detainees refusing relocation procedures. Valera turned immediately. Security response? Minimal disruption.
However, the intelligence paused briefly. The human prisoner, Ethan Cole, is involved. Something unfamiliar tightened quietly in Valera's chest. 10 minutes later, the lift doors opened onto the lower medical deck. The smell hit first. Antiseptic, burned wiring, recycled air carrying exhaustion through narrow corridors packed with displaced civilians. Kaurith security units stood tense near the center of the medical wing, while frightened refugees crowded together against the walls beneath flickering emergency lights. And, standing directly in the middle of all of it, was Ethan Cole, calm as ever. One sleeve rolled halfway up his arm, while he adjusted a portable breathing unit for an elderly alien civilian sitting on a stretcher. Not human, not even from his own world, just someone struggling to breathe. "Easy," Ethan said quietly, while tightening a damaged valve. "There you go. Slow breaths now." The frightened old alien nodded shakily. Ethan gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder before finally noticing the sudden silence spreading through the corridor. Everyone had seen her arrive. Security officers straightened immediately. Civilians lowered their eyes. Fear moved through the room like cold water. Only Ethan remained exactly the same. He looked up at Valera and sighed softly. "You people seriously need better medical equipment." The lower medical deck had once been a cargo processing corridor before the occupation converted it into an emergency civilian ward. Portable heaters hummed against the cold metallic walls, while rows of temporary beds stretched beneath flickering white lights. The air smelled like recycled oxygen, wet fabric, and exhaustion. Hundreds of displaced civilians filled the chamber in complete silence, now that General Valera Thorne stood among them. Fear traveled faster than sound. Mothers pulled children closer. Injured workers lowered their eyes. Even the Kaurith security officers looked more tense than before. Only Ethan Cole seemed completely unaffected by the shift in atmosphere. He finished adjusting the breathing unit for the elderly alien and sat back on the edge of the stretcher with a quiet sigh. "There," he said softly. "You should stop sounding like a broken air conditioner now." The old alien blinked in confusion before letting out a weak laugh through the mask. Several nearby civilians looked startled by the sound. Laughter had become rare since the invasion began. Valera stepped closer through the crowded corridor. "Explain," she ordered. Ethan glanced toward the damaged equipment beside him. "Your portable oxygen regulators are calibrated for Kaurith lung pressure." He tapped the machine lightly. "Half these people are not built the same way." One security officer frowned. "The systems meet Dominion standards." "That is the problem," Ethan replied. "You conquered 50 species and somehow still expect everybody to breathe like you." A few civilians lowered their heads quickly, hiding nervous reactions. Ethan stood and wiped his hands on his gray jacket before looking directly at Valera again. Calm, steady, infuriatingly calm. "You should probably redesign your humanitarian protocols," he added. "Right now, they look like they were written by someone who has never actually met another living creature." The nearby guards stiffened immediately. One reached instinctively toward the pulse weapon at his hip before Valera raised a single hand. The motion stopped instantly. Ethan noticed the exchange and exhaled slowly through his nose. "See? That right there," he muttered. "Everybody around you acts like breathing too aggressively might get them executed." "You speak without discipline," one guard snapped. Ethan shrugged. "And yet somehow the old guy can breathe again."
Valera studied the human carefully.
He moved through the overcrowded medical deck with effortless familiarity, checking failing heaters, tightening loose tubing, helping frightened civilians understand medical displays translated poorly into their languages. No hesitation, no concern for species or allegiance. He treated conquered refugees and Kairith personnel exactly the same way. It made no strategic sense. "Why are you helping them?" Valera asked quietly. Ethan looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because they need help. Some of these beings fought against your world less than a year ago, and now they are scared civilians sitting under broken lights." He gestured toward the crowded room. Kind of hard to hate people once you have seen them coughing blood into recycled blankets. The words landed harder than she expected. Around them, medical drones floated carefully between beds, while exhausted families huddled together beneath thermal wraps stamped with the silver crest of the Dominion. Valera suddenly became aware of how cold the room actually felt, how dim the lights were, how tired everyone looked. She had conquered planets for so long that suffering had started blending into logistics reports instead of reality. Ethan stepped toward a nearby supply cart and frowned at the contents. "You are also low on antibiotics." One officer scoffed quietly. "The Dominion possesses the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy." Ethan picked up a half-empty injector cartridge and held it toward him. "Then, congratulations," he replied. "Your advanced galaxy forgot to refill the medicine cabinet." A small child nearby laughed before immediately covering her mouth in panic. The entire corridor froze. Valera turned slowly toward the sound. A little alien girl with pale silver skin stared back at her with terrified, wide eyes from behind her mother's leg. The mother immediately dropped her gaze toward the floor. Ethan looked between them and sighed softly. "You know," he said carefully, "children are usually not supposed to look at leaders like they are staring at an incoming meteor strike." Valera's jaw tightened slightly. "Fear maintains order." Ethan folded his arms. "No, fear maintains silence." The distinction lingered heavily between them. Somewhere overhead, the flagship engines vibrated through the structure with a low mechanical hum. Ethan walked toward the supply station again and began reorganizing medical packs with efficient hands while speaking over his shoulder. "You want to know why humans survive impossible situations?" Valera said nothing. Ethan adjusted a heating unit beside an unconscious refugee before continuing quietly. "Because eventually, somebody always decides another person matters more than the system." For several seconds, the only sounds came from distant monitors and recycled air moving through vents overhead. Then the little silver-skinned girl slowly stepped out from behind her mother and approached Ethan with cautious, tiny footsteps. She held something small in both hands. A cracked ration biscuit, wrapped carefully in cloth. Ethan blinked in surprise as she offered it to him. "For helping my grandfather," she whispered. Ethan smiled softly and accepted it, like it was the most valuable thing he had ever been given. Valera watched the exchange in complete silence. And somewhere, deep beneath years of discipline, conquest, and carefully constructed armor, something inside her shifted painfully for the very first time. The observation deck was almost completely dark except for the pale blue glow of distant stars bleeding through the massive curved glass windows. Beyond them, the conquered world of Rivos Prime rotated silently beneath the flagship, like a wounded ember floating through endless black space. Entire continents still flickered with unstable power grids. Tiny storms crawled across the atmosphere where orbital strikes had disrupted weather systems hours earlier. General Valera Thorne stood alone near the glass with her hands folded behind her back, motionless beneath the dim ceiling lights. Her armor rested untouched on a nearby command table for the first time in years. Without it, she looked strangely different. Less like a weapon, more like someone carrying the weight of one. Soft silver fabric covered her frame instead of black military plating, though discipline still shaped every inch of her posture. Her pale white hair fell loosely over one shoulder, while the reflection staring back at her from the glass looked older tonight somehow. Tired in ways sleep could not repair. The doors behind her hissed open quietly. Ethan Cole stepped onto the deck, carrying 2 steaming metal cups from the lower food dispensary. "Your security team nearly scanned me 12 times for coffee," he muttered. "I think one of them believed powdered creamer was an explosive." Valera did not turn around immediately. "You are still technically a prisoner." "Then your prison has terrible customer service." Ethan walked beside the observation glass and handed her one of the cups. She stared at it cautiously. "What is it?" "Coffee. It smells aggressive." Ethan smiled faintly. "That means it is working." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The low hum of the ship's engines vibrated softly beneath their feet, while stars drifted silently beyond the glass. Valera finally took a careful sip. Her expression tightened almost immediately. "This beverage tastes like engine coolant." That is how you know humans perfected it. Another silence settled between them, but this one felt different from before. Less hostile, almost quiet enough to breathe inside. Ethan leaned lightly against the railing, overlooking the planet below. "You really do not sleep, do you?" Valera's eyes remained fixed on the stars. "Sleep is inefficient." "That is not what I asked." She did not answer. Ethan studied her reflection in the glass instead. The famous widow of stars. The conqueror who shattered fleets and collapsed empires. The being entire civilizations feared more than extinction itself. Yet standing beside him now, barefoot against cold steel flooring, with untouched coffee warming her hands, she looked less terrifying than lonely. "When I was younger," Ethan said quietly, "I thought strong people stopped hurting eventually." Valera glanced toward him slightly. "And?" "Turns out they just get quieter about it." The words lingered softly between them. Somewhere deep inside the flagship, a distant alarm chimed before fading away again. Routine operations. Endless systems. Endless war machinery continuing without rest. Valera looked back toward the planet below. "You believe compassion changes things," she said after a while. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Sometimes. History disagrees." History also said flying was impossible until somebody ignored it. A faint breath escaped her nose. Not quite amusement, but close enough that Ethan noticed immediately. "There," he said softly. "That almost looked human." Valera narrowed her violet eyes slightly. "Careful, prisoner." "See? That one was definitely human." To his surprise, the corner of her mouth moved almost invisibly before disappearing again beneath control. Ethan stared at her for half a second longer than intended. Not because of power, not fear, just curiosity. Valera caught the look immediately. "What?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Nothing." That was clearly something. He hesitated before answering honestly. "You look different without the armor." Her expression hardened slightly again. Weaker? No. Ethan took another sip of coffee. Just tired. The answer hit harder than either of them expected. Valera looked away first. Outside the observation deck, stars reflected softly across the glass, like scattered silver fire. The armor became necessary, she said at last. Necessary for what? Distance. Ethan nodded slowly, like he understood more than she wanted him to. Yeah, he murmured. Humans do that too. She studied him carefully now. You speak as though you understand war. Ethan let out a quiet breath. I understand what survives after it. His voice lowered slightly. The silence afterward. The empty chairs. The people pretending they are still fine because everyone else needs them to be. Valera looked at him for a very long time then. No fear in his eyes. No politics. No manipulation. Just honesty, spoken softly enough to sound almost fragile. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something old and frozen shifted again. Uncomfortable. Dangerous. Alive. Then suddenly the ship lights flickered once overhead. Red warning symbols flashed briefly across the observation deck walls before stabilizing. The artificial intelligence voice echoed calmly through hidden speakers. Priority transmission received from the Kairith High Council. Valera's expression changed instantly. Cold discipline sliding back into place like armor closing over exposed skin. Display it, she ordered. A holographic screen ignited across the deck. 3 towering council figures appeared in crimson light, their faces stern and unreadable. The oldest counselor spoke first. General Thorne, he said sharply.
We have reviewed your recent occupation directives.
The temperature in the room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. And we are becoming concerned about your judgment. The red holograms of the Kairith High Council hovered above the observation deck like ghosts carved from blood-colored light. Their ancient faces remained emotionless beneath ceremonial markings, while entire star systems rotated slowly behind them on translucent tactical displays. General Valera Thorne stood perfectly still before the transmission, with her hands clasped behind her back once more, every trace of softness erased beneath military control. Ethan Cole remained near the observation railing, holding the untouched metal coffee cup loosely in one hand. He was technically supposed to lower his eyes in the presence of the ruling council of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Instead, he quietly took another sip. The eldest counselor narrowed his pale silver eyes. General, he repeated coldly, your recent directives display concerning emotional compromise. Valera's voice became sharp enough to cut steel. Civilian stabilization ensures long-term compliance. Compassion ensures weakness, another counselor replied immediately. You were not chosen to nurture conquered species. Ethan muttered softly into his coffee. You guys really need better motivational speakers. 3 sets of glowing council eyes shifted toward him instantly. Valera closed her eyes for one brief second. The human remains under my authority, she said firmly. He assisted lower-deck medical operations. A human civilian now influences Dominion policy? The second counselor asked, with visible disgust. Ethan looked around the room. Honestly, influence feels like a strong word considering nobody here listens to anything. Valera should have silenced him. Every military instinct demanded it. Yet somewhere, beneath the discipline and politics and decades of conquest, she felt something dangerously unfamiliar instead. Relief. The humans spoke in rooms where everyone else only obeyed. The eldest counselor studied Ethan carefully. This creature fills your mind with sentimental weakness. Ethan sighed softly. You know, humans usually buy dinner before becoming psychological threats. Valera heard it then. A sound so small she almost missed it entirely. The sharp inhale from one of the younger bridge officers standing near the door, trying very hard not to react to the joke. Humor aboard K-Rith warships had become extinct years ago. The council clearly did not appreciate the moment. General Thorne, the eldest counselor, continued coldly. Your role is conquest. Nothing more. Valera's expression remained unreadable. The campaign is complete. Then remind the galaxy why they fear you. Silence settled heavily across the deck. Outside the observation glass, distant stars drifted endlessly through darkness, while Rivos Prime rotated beneath the ship like a wounded memory. Valera suddenly became aware of how tired she felt again. Not physically. Something deeper than exhaustion. A fatigue buried beneath years of becoming exactly what the Empire required her to be. Efficient. Unbreakable. Empty. Ethan set the coffee cup down quietly against the railing. Can I ask you something? The eldest counselor stared at him with visible irritation. You were not invited to speak. Yeah, I noticed the whole Empire has kind of a communication issue. Valera almost reacted again. Almost. Ethan folded his arms lightly. What exactly happens after you conquer everything? The counselors remained silent. Ethan gestured toward the stars outside. Seriously, let us say you win forever. Every species obeys, every planet kneels. Then what? One counselor scoffed. Order. No, Ethan replied quietly. Silence. The word lingered across the deck like a crack spreading through glass. Ethan looked directly at the holographic rulers of the galaxy without fear. You built the largest empire in existence, he said softly. And somehow everybody inside it still looks miserable. The bridge officers froze where they stood. Valera's pulse felt strangely uneven suddenly. The eldest counselor's voice lowered dangerously. General Thorne, remove the human from your presence immediately. Valera did not move. Ethan looked toward her carefully now, not pushing, not provoking, just watching, waiting. For several long seconds, the only sound came from the low vibration of the flagship engines beneath their feet. Then, Valera spoke quietly. Leave the transmission active. The counselors stiffened. General? She stepped closer to the observation glass, staring at the reflection of herself standing beside a human prisoner who somehow treated her more honestly than anyone she had known in years. Do you know what the conquered worlds say about me? She asked softly. Nobody answered. Valera's violet eyes remained fixed on the stars. They call me the widow of stars, she continued. A creature who leaves systems colder after she passes through them. Ethan said nothing. The council remained silent. Valera lowered her gaze slightly. Today I walked through refugee corridors filled with children who looked at me the same way civilians look at natural disasters. Her voice almost faltered, then steadied again immediately. And for the first time in 20 years, I realized they were right to. The observation deck became completely still. Even the council looked genuinely shocked now. The eldest counselor finally spoke with quiet warning. General Thorne, be careful. Valera slowly turned toward the crimson holograms.
Her eyes no longer looked cold. They looked awake. "No," she said softly. "I think I finally am." The atmosphere aboard the Dominion flagship changed within hours. Nobody announced it directly. Nobody needed to. Soldiers spoke quieter when General Valera Thorne entered a room now. Officers avoided eye contact longer than before. Entire corridors seemed to tense beneath invisible pressure the moment her footsteps echoed across the metal floors.
The Kairith Empire had survived for centuries because it understood certainty, strength, obedience. But uncertainty spreading from the Widow of Stars herself felt more dangerous than any enemy fleet. Ethan Cole noticed it immediately. "Your crew looks like they are waiting for lightning to hit the ship," he muttered, while helping reorganize medical supply crates in the lower civilian deck. Nearby refugees continued receiving treatment beneath rows of portable white lights, while exhausted medical drones drifted silently overhead, carrying sealed containers of antibiotics and thermal blankets. Valera stood near the entrance, observing the crowded ward with unreadable eyes. "They are disciplined." Ethan slid a supply crate into place. "No, they are scared." Valera did not argue this time. That worried him more than if she had. Before she could respond, emergency warning symbols suddenly flashed across the deck walls. Sharp red light pulsed through the corridor while the ship-wide alarm activated in short, controlled bursts instead of full combat sirens. Not external attack, internal security breach. Every Kairith guard instantly reached for weapons. Civilians panicked immediately, clutching children close, while frightened voices echoed through the medical bay. Ethan looked up sharply. "That does not sound good." The artificial intelligence voice remained calm overhead. "Security alert. Unauthorized armed movement detected on command levels 3 through 7. Valera's posture changed instantly. Cold military precision returned like a blade sliding free from its sheath. "Seal civilian corridors," she ordered. "No lethal engagement unless absolutely necessary." One officer hesitated. "General, hostile forces are moving toward this sector." Valera narrowed her eyes. Hostile forces? Then realization hit her. Not enemy soldiers. Internal division. The council had moved faster than expected. Ethan saw the shift in her expression immediately. "Those are your people, aren't they?" Valera looked toward the flashing corridor lights. "The High Council does not tolerate instability. And apparently compassion counts as instability now." A loud, metallic impact echoed somewhere above them, followed by the distant hiss of security doors sealing throughout the ship. Panic spread through the civilian ward instantly. Children cried, medical carts overturned. Kairith guards moved into defensive positions around the entrances while overhead lighting flickered between white and red emergency mode. Ethan immediately stepped toward the frightened civilians instead of away from them. "Hey," he called firmly. "Look at me, not the alarms." His voice cut through the panic surprisingly well. "Stay low, stay together. Nobody run." Valera watched him for half a second longer than necessary. Even during crisis, the human instinctively moved toward frightened people instead of safety. Irrational, dangerous, entirely human. Another impact shook the deck harder this time. Dust drifted from the ceiling vents. Then the nearest corridor doors exploded inward with a shower of sparks as armored Kairith soldiers stormed into the medical sector carrying black pulse rifles. Their armor bore the crimson markings of High Council enforcement divisions, not standard military. Political execution units. Every refugee froze in terror. The lead officer removed his helmet, slowly revealing pale gray skin and emotionless silver eyes. General Valera Thorn, he announced coldly. By authority of the Kerith High Council, you are relieved of command pending psychological evaluation. Silence crashed across the room. Ethan stared at the officer. Wow, he murmured softly. You people really do not do subtle. The officer ignored him completely. Step away from the civilians and surrender your command clearance immediately. Valera stood motionless beneath the flashing red emergency lights. Her violet eyes moved slowly across the frightened refugees crowded behind overturned medical stations, then toward Ethan, standing defensively near a group of children, despite having absolutely no weapon at all. Finally, back toward the armed enforcement unit sent by her own empire. Something inside her settled quietly then, like a decision finally reaching its end. No, she said softly. The officer's expression darkened. General, you mistake obedience for loyalty, Valera replied. I served the Dominion for 23 years. Her voice remained calm enough to feel dangerous. But I will not terrorize civilians to preserve political comfort. Ethan blinked slowly beside her. That, he muttered under his breath, was actually kind of impressive. The enforcement soldiers raised weapons instantly. Nearby civilians gasped in fear. Ethan stepped slightly in front of the nearest frightened child without thinking. Valera noticed the movement immediately. The officer noticed too. The human has compromised your judgment, he accused. Valera's eyes hardened. No, she replied quietly. The human reminded me I still had one. Then, suddenly, the ship lights died completely. Total darkness swallowed the corridor for one terrifying second, before emergency backup systems activated in dim crimson strips along the floor. Confused voices echoed through the medical ward. Tactical displays vanished, security systems rebooted, and in the chaos, Ethan felt a strong hand suddenly grab his arm. Move, Valera ordered quietly. Now. Emergency lights pulsed dimly along the lower corridors of the Dominion flagship, while backup generators groaned somewhere deep inside the massive vessel. Red illumination washed across steel walls streaked with smoke from overloaded systems. Civilian refugees huddled silently behind sealed medical doors as Kerith security units rushed through adjacent hallways carrying pulse rifles and tactical scanners. The ship no longer felt like an empire's greatest war machine. It felt nervous, unstable, alive with fear. Ethan Cole stumbled slightly as General Valera Thorn pulled him through a maintenance corridor branching away from the lower medical sectors. You know, he muttered while catching his breath. Where I come from, prison escapes usually involve less glowing red lights. Quiet, Valera ordered softly. Her voice remained controlled, but Ethan noticed the subtle tension underneath it now. Not fear for herself, fear for the civilians left behind. That realization settled strangely in his chest. They moved quickly through narrow service passages hidden behind the primary command decks. Pipes vibrated overhead, carrying coolant through the flagship, while emergency sirens echoed faintly through distant sections of the ship. Valera navigated the maze without hesitation. She had commanded this vessel for nearly a decade. Every corridor, every hidden junction, every emergency route. Yet tonight, the ship felt unfamiliar beneath her feet, like it no longer belonged to her. How bad is this? Ethan asked quietly after several minutes. Valera did not slow her pace. The High Council believes I have become compromised. By me? By conscience. Ethan blinked once. That is somehow both flattering and deeply concerning. Another explosion echoed faintly through the upper decks. Dust drifted from ceiling vents. Valera immediately stopped beside a sealed blast door and activated a holographic control panel embedded into the wall. The display flickered erratically before stabilizing. Ethan caught sight of multiple red markers spreading across the ship's schematics. Entire command sections were now under enforcement control. They moved faster than expected, Valera murmured. Political officers already control the bridge. Ethan leaned against the wall beside her. Okay, I have a question. Make it quick. Why are you helping me? Valera's hand paused over the controls for one brief second. Ethan continued before she could answer.
You could probably save yourself right now if you handed me over and blamed all this on human manipulation.
Silence lingered between them beneath the flickering emergency lights. Finally, Valera looked at him directly. Really looked at him. The tired human mechanic wearing a wrinkled gray jacket stained with medical fluid and engine grease. The prisoner who kept helping frightened strangers while standing inside the heart of the empire that destroyed his world. That would be the logical choice, she admitted quietly. Yeah. Ethan folded his arms lightly. So why are you not making it? Valera stared at him for several long seconds. Then, softly enough to almost disappear beneath the alarms, she answered, Because you stayed. Ethan frowned slightly. Stayed where? In the medical sector. Her violet eyes lowered briefly. You stood between armed soldiers and civilians who were not even your species. Ethan shrugged. That is just called being decent. No, Valera said quietly.
That is called courage.
The words hit him harder than expected. Ethan looked away first. Somewhere nearby, emergency bulkheads slammed shut with a deep metallic crash. Valera finally reopened the corridor access route and motioned him forward. Come, she said softly. There is somewhere we can reach the fleet command network. They descended deeper into the vessel, through an older section of the ship rarely used by senior officers anymore. The atmosphere changed immediately. Fewer polished walls, older machinery, dim industrial lighting buzzing overhead. Ethan noticed faded maintenance markings scratched into steel from years earlier. This part of the ship actually feels real, he murmured. Valera glanced toward him slightly. What does that mean? The upper decks feel too perfect. Ethan ran his fingers across an old dent in the wall paneling as they walked. Humans trust places with scratches more. To his surprise, Valera understood exactly what he meant. The lower engineering corridors carried history openly. Signs of repair, exhaustion, survival. Unlike the flawless command decks built entirely around appearances. They reached a large reinforced door marked with obsolete K-Reith military symbols. Valera pressed her hand against the scanner. The ancient mechanism hissed open slowly, revealing a hidden command observatory overlooking the massive central hangar below. Hundreds of fighters rested silently beneath rows of dim blue maintenance lights. The chamber itself looked forgotten by time. Dust coated old tactical consoles. A faded Dominion banner hung motionless near the ceiling. Ethan stepped inside carefully. What is this place? Valera looked around the abandoned observatory with unreadable eyes. The first command center I ever served in before the wars expanded. Her voice softened slightly. Back when we still believed the Empire existed to protect people. Ethan studied her quietly then. Not the conqueror, not the widow of stars. Just someone standing inside the ghost of who she used to be. Valera moved toward the central console and activated the ancient fleet communication system. Static flickered across the dark room before tactical displays slowly illuminated the chamber in pale blue light. What are you doing? Ethan asked.
Valera's expression hardened with calm certainty now. Ending this. Then suddenly, the communication console intercepted a live transmission already spreading across the fleet. The face of the eldest High Counselor appeared above the projector in crimson holographic light. "Attention, all Dominion forces," the Counselor announced coldly. "General Valera Thorn has betrayed the Empire. Effective immediately, she is to be detained on sight." The old observatory fell silent. Ethan slowly looked toward Valera. The galaxy's greatest conqueror stared back at the hologram of her own execution order without blinking. Then, for the first time since he met her, Ethan saw something unexpected cross her face. Not fear. Relief.
The ancient observatory remained silent, except for the low mechanical hum of forgotten systems waking from decades of dormancy. Pale blue tactical light washed across dust-covered consoles, while hundreds of Dominion warships floated outside the massive viewing glass, like frozen shadows suspended in space. General Valera Thorn stood motionless beneath the hologram of her own execution order, violet eyes reflecting crimson warning symbols drifting through the air around her. Ethan Cole leaned against the old command console nearby with his arms folded loosely across his chest. "You know," he said quietly, "most people react a little worse when entire governments try to arrest them." Valera looked toward the stars beyond the glass. "I spent 23 years becoming exactly what they needed." Her voice sounded strangely calm now. "This is the first honest thing they have said about me in a very long time." Ethan studied her carefully. No fear, no anger.
Just exhaustion finally beginning to loosen its grip around someone who had carried an empire on her shoulders for too long. Suddenly, the ancient communication console crackled alive again. One by one, fleet command channels flooded the observatory. Captains requesting orders, security divisions reporting confusion across command decks, entire occupation fleets waiting to see which version of General Thorn would emerge from the silence. The Conqueror, or something else. Valera stepped slowly toward the central transmission platform. Ethan straightened slightly. "What are you doing?" She activated the fleet-wide command frequency without hesitation. Instantly, thousands of ships across orbit connected to the observatory signal. Every bridge officer, every soldier, every frightened civilian monitoring emergency channels throughout the fleet. The galaxy's most feared military commander stood alone beneath dim, forgotten lights, wearing no armor at all. For the first time in decades, Valera Thorn looked like a person instead of a weapon. The ship-wide static faded into silence. Then she spoke. "This is General Valera Thorn." Her voice carried calmly through every Dominion vessel orbiting Rivos Prime. "For years, I believed fear created peace." Ethan watched her carefully from the shadows near the console. Outside the glass, stars burned silently across endless black space. "I told myself conquest would end suffering," Valera continued. "That control would protect the galaxy from chaos." Her eyes lowered slightly. "But all I truly created was silence." Across the fleet, thousands listened in absolute stillness. "A civilization that obeys only because it fears punishment is not loyal," she said softly. "It is wounded." Ethan felt something tighten quietly in his chest, hearing her say the words aloud. Not because they were perfect, because they were honest. Valera looked toward the stars again. "Today, a human prisoner asked me a question no enemy ever dared ask." A faint breath escaped her nose. "What happens
after you conquer everything. The observatory remained completely still.
I finally understand the answer, she said quietly. Nothing.
Somewhere far below on the refugee decks, frightened civilians huddled beneath emergency lights, listening to the woman who conquered their worlds speak with a voice that no longer sounded empty. Fear can force surrender, Valera continued, but it cannot build a future. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached toward the command console beside her. Ethan realized what she was about to do half a second before she did it. "Valera," he said softly. She looked toward him one last time. "You asked me once why I could not sleep," she murmured quietly. Ethan held her gaze. "Yeah." A faint, sad smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Because deep down," she whispered, "I knew the galaxy deserved better than me." Before he could answer, Valera pressed her hand against the fleet command interface. Across orbit, every Dominion warship received the same impossible order simultaneously. Full military withdrawal from occupied civilian sectors. Suspension of planetary enforcement operations. Immediate humanitarian aid deployment authorization. Silence exploded across the communication channels afterward. Confused officers shouted over each other. Tactical systems scrambled. Political command structures collapsed into chaos. But beneath all of it, another sound slowly emerged across open civilian frequencies. Relief. Ethan stared at her in disbelief for several seconds before laughing softly under his breath. He really just started the biggest political disaster in galactic history. Valera finally looked at him fully then. Not as a prisoner, not as an enemy. Just Ethan. "Probably," she admitted. "Worth it, though." Somewhere beyond the observation glass, the first Dominion destroyers began turning away from the planet beneath them. Then another, then dozens more. Massive engines ignited silently against the stars as the occupation fleet slowly retreated from Rivos Prime for the very first time. Ethan stepped beside her near the glass, while the two of them watched the impossible unfold together. "So," he asked quietly after a while, "how exactly did I defeat the most feared general in the galaxy without firing a single shot?" Valera's eyes reflected the moving stars outside. For a moment she looked younger somehow, lighter. "You treated me," she said softly, "like someone still worth saving." Ethan did not answer immediately. He just stood beside her while warships vanished slowly into deep space one by one. No alarms now, no speeches. Only silence returning to the galaxy in a completely different shape than before. Hours later, as dawn finally touched the recovering cities of Rivos Prime below, a little silver-skinned girl from the medical deck looked up through a shelter window and watched the stars clearing overhead. And for the first time since the invasion began, the sky no longer looked afraid.
Thank you for watching until the end. Watch the full story in the comments and video description. Like and subscribe to the channel to see more interesting content.